The fueling records from the day of the accident provide the answers they've been looking for.
This is a typical fueling record.
But when investigators examine the calculations for Flight 143...
And this is from Flight 143.
They look anything but straightforward. The document clearly shows the amount of fuel in the right and left tanks. But investigators are troubled by two particular numbers. One converts volume to kilograms. The other converts it to pounds.
He shouldn't have been using both. So did you convert to pounds or to kilograms?
To pound? No, to kilo. Can I see that again?
Further interviews with the technicians and crew reveal that the events on Flight 143
now I don't know what I did.
were caused by human error involving poor calculations and ultimately inadequate training.
Okay, fellows, we've finished with the fuel.
The technicians refueling Flight 143 got muddled in their calculations while converting the volume coming out of the fuel truck to the weight of the fuel in the plane's tanks. No one who saw the calculations that day noticed the basic error. In 1983, Canadian ground crews were used to converting the amount of fuel leaving their trucks into pounds. The 767 was the first plane in Air Canada's fleet to have metric fuel gauges. Its fuel should have been measured not in pounds, but in kilograms, which requires a different calculation. Flight 143 needed 22,300 kilograms of fuel for the trip. But pilots and technicians let it leave with 22,300 pounds instead. Because a pound is about half a kilogram, the plane only got half the fuel it required, which explains why Pearson's flight computer told him he had plenty of fuel. He entered the wrong amount of fuel to start with. In the past, the flight engineer calculated the fuel loads. This accident raised an important question. Whose job was it with the two-man crew?
Better training is definitely an issue in an incident such as that. If everyone is trained and the lines are drawn as to who's responsible for what, then there's no ambiguity on it. People know what they're responsible for. In this case, it was sort of open-ended. We weren't aware who was responsible for the final say on this field stuff.
A subsequent inquiry found that none of those involved that day was trained in metric calculations. Not the ground technicians, not the pilots.
I had not received any, neither of us had received any training at all on doing these calculations.
The computer that had replaced the 767's flight engineer was broken, and no one knew who should be doing its job. Air Canada 143 was essentially down a man.
And the goal is to prevent a recurrence of this particular event. And also, we also find out other systems that might have been either at fault or maybe they could cause a problem in the future. And you do try to prevent recurrence.
All right.
It took a string of mechanical and human failures for Flight 143 to run out of fuel. But another failure that day may have saved some lives. If the plane's nose gear had not collapsed, it would have taken Pearson much longer to stop. The plane could have slid into the people who were at the strip that day, which would have had catastrophic results. There could have been more injuries or even loss of life. Pearson and Quintel were partly blamed for their roles in the incident. A government inquiry recommended that Air Canada re-evaluate the training of flight crews and ground technicians in metric fuel conversions. It also recommended that the airline keep more spare parts, such as fuel gauge processors. Rick Dion retired in 2003 after a long career as Air Canada's coordinator of maintenance control. First Officer Maurice Quintel was promoted to captain in 1989. Captain Bob Pearson went on to fly 10 more years for Air Canada, his experience at Gimli shaping the rest of his career as a commercial pilot.
This experience affected me mostly by making me more relaxed as a pilot, giving me the feeling that as much as I've trained for all those years, that there's always that question about how you're going to perform when the chips are down, and I now have the feeling that no matter what, as long as an aircraft stayed together, I would get it safely back on the ground. And so it's been a relaxing experience.
It's the knowledge that you know under stress you can perform. Before that, you don't know. You just hope you will, and you train for it, but you never know.
With the things that they had to deal with was magnificent. I think that got proven in the simulator in Vancouver. They tried out this same circumstances with several crews, and they all crashed.
Probably the most important thing that came out of it was a realization that when something new is introduced, special attention and training needs to be accomplished for people to be aware what they're dealing with.
When we had landed and the airplane was all in one piece, I thought, wow, I got another chance to fly again.
Because of a tragedy like that, once you take your deck of cards and fire it in the air, you're truly free. And I guess from that point of view, Gimli could, I find it very difficult to say, but Gimli was maybe almost the best thing that ever happened to me, next to meeting my wonderful wife and marrying her.
2 days after the landing at Gimli, Air Canada's 767 was back in the air on its way to Winnipeg for repairs. A quarter century later, that same plane is still in service, and it still carries the nickname that Bob Pearson earned it, the Gimli Glider.
November 13th, 1999, a weekend caving